do you want to, I mean, everyone or almost everyone has probably read the book and knows a little bit about you, but do you want to take a second to say who you are? And briefly, you say it in the book, but why you decided to jump into this world of happiness?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm Gretchen Rubin. So I'm a writer. I've written several books about happiness, good habits, human nature, and other things as well. Um, I also have a podcast, which you mentioned, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which I do with my sister, Elizabeth Kraft. She's a TV showrunner. And each week we talk about how to be happier, healthier, more productive, more creative. And I got the idea to work on the Happiness Project in a very kind of inconspicuous moment of my life. I was just finishing up my biography of JFK, and as a writer, that means you have a little bit more open space, kind of in between when you're finished with it and it hits the shelves. And so, I was stuck on a city bus, and I thought, well, what do I want from life anyway? And I thought, well, I want to be happy. And I realized I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happy. Could I be happier? What does happiness mean anyway? And so I went to my library and got a giant stack of books and started researching it, which is something that happens to me all the time. I will get really focused on something and do a lot of research just for fun. But this just got bigger and bigger, and there were so many things I wanted to try and I wanted to learn. I kept wanting to go more and more and more deeply into different aspects of it. And I thought, I should have a happiness project that very first day. And then that's always how I thought about it. And then I finally thought, well, gosh, maybe this should be my next book. And that's why a lot of people told me not to call it the Happiness Project. They thought that was a bad title, but I'm like, I don't know, it is the Happiness Project. And then it turned out that this area was just so vast that I've basically been focusing on little kind of subtopics of happiness, like habits and the four tendencies, which is my personality framework. My book coming up in April is about the five senses. So clutter, wrote a little book about clutter for fun. And so that's what I've been working on.
And I will share with you on a personal level, my favorite thing about this book club is, as a clinical psychologist, I think I know a lot about happiness and well-being, but I learned so much, and there's so much from your book and from your work that I apply to my everyday life. The rule that if a task takes a minute or less, just do it is one that I do all the time, because before that I had these tasks that would just keep falling on the bottom of my to-do list and never get done, and they were really cool tasks and I never did them. The spending 15 minutes before bed tidying up, stuff like that is so doable. And I think that's aside from your excellent clear writing, one of the best parts about your work, in my opinion, is that it's so applicable.
Good. Yeah, I definitely have this sort of Benjamin Franklin side to me where I'm like, what can we take away for our own lives? Like, how can we translate this into action in part of your ordinary day? I find that to be really just fascinating to think about how to do that.
Yeah. And before I get into, I got over 50 questions from people. Things. So before we jump into that, and I obviously won't go through all 50, but I'll highlight some, again, on a personal level, during college many years ago, was really into creative writing, wrote a novel and wanted to pursue that, and then decided that if I wanted to get my PhD, I couldn't do both at the same time. But your section on writing a novel in a month, to me seems really ambitious, but has inspired me to get back into writing. And I've been spending a little bit of time every day doing some creative writing. So thank you for
that's great.
My passions, and then the other personal part that felt really cool is in college, again, I did a lot of research with Barry Schwartz, who you mention in your book, who wrote Paradox of Choice, and has done a lot of work on choice and how that helps and hinders us. And he was a huge mentor to me. And so again, in the realm of choice, I thought with working with him so closely, I knew a lot about that, and you, again, never cease to make things so digestible and applicable. So I got a real kick out of that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, worlds collide. Yes.
Yeah. So, I think one of the really important things that you address up front, that you're very transparent about at the beginning of the book, is that you started the Happiness Project from a place of privilege. right? You had a supportive family, you had financial means to be able to embark on this, and you address that not everyone is that fortunate. Um, and I want to start simply by asking for people who feel socially isolated, not necessarily by choice, who have either lost people or aren't close to family members or have just moved to a new place and feel like they don't have a lot of connection, or people who can't afford to make even small purchases like you recommend that can lead to happiness. Do you have any specific advice? I can imagine some people reading this and feeling like this all sounds great and really applicable, but I wasn't dealt as fortunate of a hand. Do you have, any advice for someone coming from that perspective?
Well, I mean, this is, I don't need to tell you this, but, if you had to pick one thing, ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists agree that it's relationships. So if you're trying to figure out how to spend your time, energy, or money, or maybe you don't have any money, but uh, if you had to pick one area in life, you would pick relationships. And so if you're feeling socially isolated, you want to think, okay, that is job one. Like, what can I do about that? And of course, it'd be very different depending on someone's situation, what their circumstances are, like what is creating that social isolation, and how because there's many reasons people would be socially isolated. And then, same thing, like maybe you don't have any extra money to spend. And so you're going to have to think about ways to do it where you don't have to spend extra money to do it. So maybe you're not traveling to go see somebody because you can't afford it. But then are there ways to deepen the relationships with the people who are right around you? Because if you had to pick one area in life, that would probably be the one to say. Then I would also say, just from my observation too, like, a sense of energy is so important for happiness, because so often when we feel drained or overwhelmed or just sluggish, then everything feels harder. Like all the other things that you would do that would make you happier, but you just like, I can't even deal with it because I'm so exhausted. And on the Happier podcast in 2020, we didn't even know it was going to be the COVID year, we challenged ourselves and listeners to walk 20 and 20, and then we had read 21 and 21 and rest 22 and 22. But walk, if you just walk 20 minutes, it's just like the benefits are just enormous. And it's a very rare person who cannot walk, or whatever would be the equivalent, given their physical circumstances, for 20 minutes, where you're just getting a little bit of that exercise, and that helps you sleep better. It raises your energy. It tends to boost your mood, boost your immune function. And so, part of it is just thinking about your physical body, which always going to color your emotional experience, and then also going to relationships. So I would say that if you feel like you can do practically, there's very little that you can do. I would say, I don't know. I don't know what you would say, but I would say that's where I would start, I think.
No, I think that that's an important point. And I think that, especially right now with the holidays coming up, or I guess we're already in the midst of holiday season, that the holidays can be a time of a lot of joy and celebration and happiness for people, but for other people, it can be a real time of isolation and loneliness and difficulty. And, on a related note, with the importance of social connection, what would you say to people who find themselves struggling most during the holidays and struggling to find the joy that seems to be around everyone, with music playing and lights up, and people who feel like it's not a time of joy for them?
Well, it's hard to make generalizations because, of course, people are in very different places. So for somebody, it's someone important has died, and now the traditions feel like they can never be the same, and that's a certain kind of loss. And then there's the person where maybe they feel estranged from their family, and so it's like, oh, this is a time when all these families are getting together, and that just reminds me of like how bad my situation is. Or maybe you're like in a new place and you're like, I would love to go to some holiday parties, but I don't know anybody, and nobody's asking me to any parties, and I don't have anybody that I can ask, and like, what am I going to do? And so there's all different reasons why that might be true. So I think the thing is always to say, well, and I think sometimes people get swept up in like, what does everybody think? Or like, what should I think? And to me, it's always very helpful to be like, well, really, what is my reality and what's true for me and what do I even want? Like, maybe you don't even care. Maybe like everybody else cares. I don't even care. Like, so, but are there things that I can do because nobody else is doing them? And so amazing, like the people who fly on Christmas Day, because they're like, this is great. I don't care about Christmas. I like an emptier airport. Like, are there ways you can think it about what you want and what's important to you? Um, and sometimes it's just like it's not a happy time, and you're in a period of grief, and that's just you probably really in the end wouldn't even want to skip that. It's part of love and loss. And so, then the question is, well, given the reality of how you feel, how can you be as happy as you can be given the circumstances, which maybe not vary. So I think it's
Yeah.
hard to generalize because there's so many reasons a person might be feeling that way.
No, I think that's very true. And I think for a lot of people too, finding ways to create your own traditions, even if those be, small things, having a specific kind of food or going, depending on where you live, going on a specific hike or, something to create your own traditions, I think for a lot of people can be really powerful, especially when they feel like they're not part of a larger tradition or community during a time like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, switching gears to something else that's perhaps timely like the holidays, but is a little different with COVID, which you mentioned. What have you learned about happiness, or what has challenged your understanding of happiness during the period of COVID?
I think for me, I think it heightened things that I already knew were true. It like underscored them, which is we need relationships for happiness and we're wired to see people in person. And technology is great as like, second best, but that it cannot replace and that it just like, it really it's people are still struggling, and even now that we're going back to hybrid, it's like how are we managing relationships where we can't take it for granted that we're going to be face to face, like that we're just not wired that way, and we
Yeah.
haven't like dealt with it enough to have a lot of workarounds. And so it just highlights that. And in studying the five senses, it's like you're smelling people, like you're feeling the air between you, you're reading all this thing from body language, and it's flattened. And there's many great things about being able to be remote. And I think now people are much like I now connect with like friends who live overseas more because I'm like, I could call you just as well. Like, I don't know why I had this idea, like why I'll do a walk and talk with you in London. It's just, I got in the habit of doing it. So I think that's that. And then I also think that, I wrote a book, Better Than Before, about habits, and I'm very focused on habits because so often when people are trying to be happier, they're like, I know I would be happier if I exercised more, or I got more sleep, or I spent more time with my friends, or I read more, or worked on that novel that I've been wanting to write. And then you're thinking like, well, then why aren't you? And then it really, I realize, becomes a challenge of habit formation. So then you're like, okay, well, given who I am, how can I change my habits? So then I got very focused on habits. And one of the things that I saw was how the COVID times shook up people's habits. Some for the better, some for the worse. So some for the better, it's like, oh, now that I'm not commuting all the time, I can exercise, I can cook healthier food. I'm calmer and I'm having like more joyful times with my family because I'm less stressed. And then maybe you're hanging on to that during hybrid, or you've just sort of figured it out. But also people got good habits disrupted. Like I had been doing yoga for years and I haven't done yoga since, or now that I'm working from home, I just like have got my hand in a bag of chips all day. Or I find that I am becoming more socially isolated because I didn't like, this was a friend of mine I was talking to. He's kind of a private person, and I never thought of him, and I don't think he thought of himself as somebody who got like a huge amount of social vitality from like going into the office, but he really struggled when he wasn't going to the office anymore because even though he had a family, it just turned out that he really relied on that, the architecture of the work week, to really feed him much more than he realized. And so and so I think there were a lot of good habits that were disrupted. And I think for some people it's been kind of hard to rebuild those, partly because and there hasn't been much discussion of this, we're kind of used to having a 5-day, 2-day schedule because we do that in school and then we do that at work. So 5 days on, 2 days off. And like a lot of times people have habits that work that way. Well, now it's like maybe that's not what your life is like. And maybe it's not even like you're always off on Monday and Friday. So now you have like your 3 days in and your 5 days home. Maybe it changes week to week because it depends on other people's schedules or clients who are visiting, or like you're all balancing the conference room schedule. And so you don't have the regularity, and that can be a challenge for people with their healthy habits. So that's one thing. I mean, I always knew that habits were really important for happiness. Like I clearly like was very focused on it, but this showed me like habits are important and habits can be tricky.
And what would you say to people who lost touch with their habits during COVID? Either they couldn't go to the yoga class they went to, or they couldn't, you know, get lunch with a friend that they used to see monthly. And I guess that's not a habit, but,
Sure.
you know, people who lost touch with the things that they used to enjoy and now don't necessarily feel as much incentive to rejoin them. What are easy steps that they could take to getting back into that routine that they used to have?
Oh, it so depends because people are so different. Well, the basic thing that you need to do is you have to think about like, well, what is the habit that you would want? What is the aim that you're trying to address? So, because like maybe you're going to have a different system to get there, but like, what is the aim? So I want to see my friends regularly. I want to exercise regularly. I want to, whatever it might be, or I don't want to do something. And then you have to think about, okay, well, then how would I create a habit around that? And to admit like, okay, well, I relied on going to this class, or like every day I would drop off my child at school, then I would drive into work, and then I would go to the gym that was across the street from my office, but now I don't do that. So how are you going to rebuild that? Now, this kind of touches on the four tendencies framework, which that's a whole thing. But if anybody wants to take the four tendencies quiz, just go to GretchenRubin.com and search for quiz, or go to quiz.gretchenrubin.com, and it will tell you if you're an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. And if you're struggling with a habit, that's a really good thing to know, because that will really help you decide how to effectively work on a habit. So like if you were a person and you were like, hey, I'm an obliger, I would immediately say, okay, you've got to create outer accountability. Whereas if you're like, hey, I'm a rebel, I definitely would not tell you to pursue outer accountability, because that could actually be counterproductive. And so if you are struggling with a habit, I think that's a really good place to start, because it can just make it much more effective in figuring out what kind of strategy you would try to start kind of cementing that habit into place, because there is a lot of variation among people.
Yeah. And that gets at, let's see if I can do this, a question that someone just submitted, that she feels so overwhelmed by all the different habits she wants to build. And she was asking, how does she decide where to start? Do you think that taking this quiz and kind of seeing what style she is a good place?
Well, that brings up a really good distinction, which is, what is the strategy that I should follow, whatever my aims are, and then like, what are the aims that I should pursue? So if you're trying to figure out like, well, how would I do it? Then in Better Than Before, I talk about the 21 strategies that we can use. And so that's things like scheduling, convenience, inconvenience, other people, identity, clarity, rewards, loophole spotting, all those. So you might want to know, you might want to find out your tendency. So take the tendency quiz, and then that will help you decide which strategy to use. If what you're saying is there's a million aims I have, which is the most important aim? I would say, first of all, one's related to relationships. And then there's also, one of the strategies is the strategy of foundation. And that means you want to get your foundation strong, because there are certain habits that kind of set the stage for all the other habits. And so, and I mentioned one of them before, which is exercise. So the strategy of foundation is habits related to exercise, getting enough sleep, making sure that you're eating and drinking properly. Like, because one reason a lot of people eat unhealthfully is they skip breakfast, they skip lunch, and then they're so hungry that they're just like opening any crinkly bag that they can get their hands on. And so you want to manage that so that you can eat, you can follow that whatever healthy eating habits you want to follow, because you're not so hungry or thirsty. And then weirdly, clutter. And this is not true for everybody. Some people are truly clutter blind. And I wrote the book Outer Order, Inner Calm because I became so interested in this when I studied this strategy of foundation. But that, and give us a thumbs up if you agree with this. For a lot of people, outer order contributes to inner calm and an inner sense of energy. Like that is just true for me. And I was like, it doesn't matter though. It's totally disproportionate because a crowded coat closet is not a big deal in the context of a happy life, but I would create some outer order. I would clean out a closet. I would feel amazing and feel like and a friend of mine said, I finally cleaned out my fridge and now I know I can switch careers. I'm like, I know how that feels. And so part of foundation, if you feel this way, so if you're clutter blind, like if you listen to Happier with Gretchen Rubin, you know, my sister Elizabeth is truly clutter blind. She lets me clear her clutter purely because it's such a joy for me. She really doesn't care. But if you're not that, if you are the kind of person, which is a lot of people, for whom outer order does contribute to a sense of energy and possibility, it's great to do that because even though it doesn't, it's kind of irrational. People over and over will say, you know, I cleaned out my office and now I feel like I can commit to that exercise regimen, or like I cleaned out my bedroom and now it feels so much more restful. I'm finding it easier to like turn off the TV and go to sleep. There is this relationship for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely whenever I feel stressed out and want to procrastinate, one of the first things I think about doing is reorganizing a closet or a drawer,
Okay.
because for me to feel productive with, you know, and get a sense of calm at the same time.
Okay, and that's something to be wary of because I have exactly the same thing, and that's procrastinating. Procrastinating, because it can be good sometimes because you're like, I'll get a boost of energy because I'll like organize my office. But if you're doing things like, now I'm going to alphabetize my library, or like I need to steam clean all the curtains in my house, it's like it can become, for some people, is procrastinating. Another thing that I also have is procrastinating. This is when you procrastinate by creating something new, or you know, like, and I have so many projects going at the same time that sometimes I'm like, okay, you got to shut down Oracle project, or like my color pilgrimage, or my book of aphorisms, or you know, I got all this stuff going on, and sometimes I think I like that, but it can become, so you know, every medicine can become poison. But I hear you on procrastinating.
And someone else wants to know, related to habits, that some of these habits she knows are good for her, but she doesn't want to do them. So she wants to know, how can she motivate herself to do things that are good for her but aren't necessarily exciting?
See, it kind of depends on her tendency. If she knows her tendency, tell you know that would, because if she were in a folder, I'd say put it on the calendar.
Right.
If she's a questioner, I'm like, well, you're not convinced. You don't sound convinced at all that these are things that would really make you happier, healthier, more productive, more creative. And you need to have that clarity if you're a questioner, because once you're convinced, you'll do it. If you're an obliger, it's purely outer accountability. Don't say things like, I need to get motivated. I need to take time for self-care. I need to learn to put myself, you know, first, or I need to make myself a priority. No, no, no. It's all about outer accountability if you're an obliger. Statistically, you probably are an obliger because they're the biggest group for both men and women. And if you're a rebel, it's like you're going to do what you want. So either you want it or you don't want it. If you want it, think about why you want it, because you're like, yeah, maybe I don't feel like doing it, but it's part of like having having the energy to travel and to do the things I want, or it's part of, you know, being a responsible parent, or whatever an important, or part of being a environmentalist, whatever an important identity is to you. But it's sort of, that's why knowing your tendency is so helpful, because a lot of times that will make it much clearer how you would approach that. Because if somebody says to me, I really, really want this, but I can't get motivated, I'm like, don't worry about motivation. Don't expect to be motivated by motivation, because sometimes people think if they just pump themselves up into a frenzy of desire, that will get them to act. It doesn't. It
Right.
doesn't. Motivation doesn't really make a difference,
Right. And
in
we're
my
getting,
observation.
yeah, we're getting a ton of questions here about habits. I'll return to happiness in a little bit, but people
They're
are
so fun. We can.
about. So someone asks how to create habits when other people in her life are creating chaos. So she says, for example, she has a toddler. So how to create healthy habits when it either it be a toddler or a chaotic coworker or boss or someone is disrupting, the constancy of life.
Well, it sort of depends, because if you're talking about like the chaotic, part of it is the only person you can change is yourself, and the only person you can control is yourself. So when you were first talking about the question, I thought it was more like the sweetheart who's not cooperating with like the new healthy eating. So in that case, it's like, well, you have to just like let them do their thing and you do your thing. A chaotic toddler is much more about a season of life. And I think what you have to sort of say to yourself, and this is like, if you're an upholder, if you know the four tendencies and you're an upholder like me, like it's upholders particularly can get very unsettled when they can't like stick to their good habits, and they tend to have like a lot of things that they want, and they want things a certain way, and they can get very uneasy when they can't sort of be at that level. So I think part of it is just acknowledging the reality of it. Like you're like, okay, I'm a night person and it's really hard for me to go to bed before midnight, but my toddler is a morning person who gets up at 5 if I'm lucky, and so I'm chronically underslept. And it's like, yeah, that's tough. We've all been there. And it's kind of a phase. And I think sometimes you have to accept that things aren't going to be, it isn't the time to train for the marathon necessarily, or you're not going to have your yoga practice like at the level that you would hope for it to be, because you're working through, and that's just the reality of it. And that's one thing if it's a season of life. If it looks like it's your life, kind of like, okay, this is the reality of my life, then you have to start thinking about like, well, given the reality of my circumstances, how do I do the best that I can do towards those healthy habits, but being realistic with myself so I don't constantly feel like I'm failing and getting discouraged. But how could I achieve those aims, or at least partially? Because it is true that sometimes, we don't have the freedom and the opportunity to set things up, as we would ideally like to do them.
Yeah. And I guess talking about transitioning there to a different type of relationship, you talk a lot about the cycle of how making other people happier makes yourself happier and vice versa. But I think that some people too can err too much on the side of relying on making other people happy in order to make themselves happy. People
Yes.
who say, my happiness depends on the people around me.
Yes.
For
Oh,
people like that, to what extent would you recommend that people rely on making others happy for their own happiness before they almost start to neglect their own well-being?
well, that's a very obliger thing to say. And obligers often really do feel that way. And I want to read this beautiful quote from Bob Dylan because it goes right to that. I've always loved this. And so this is from his memoir, Chronicles. He said, I looked at the menu, then I looked at my wife. The one thing about her that I always loved was that she was never one of those people who thinks that someone else is the answer to their happiness, me or anybody else. She's always had her own built-in happiness. And I think that's part of it, is like, so it's like one of the best, and that's why I think that you were talking about the two sides of that principle of happiness, what I call the second splendid truth, because I was so enchanted by the numbers of Buddhism. So one of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy. And one of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. And I think if you're a person who feels like I can't be happy unless others are happy, then you really do have to start to like remind yourself that one of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. There is emotional contagion. Happier people tend to make people happier. And it's certainly true too that, I mean, how many people do you feel that who have talked about how they feel unable to be honest with people in their lives, because because they would upset them so much. It's almost like in your desire to make someone happy, you close them off. And a good friend of mine had cancer, and it had come back, and that's not good. And she said that she couldn't see her mother, and she's so close to her mother. And she said, I couldn't handle my mother's grief and worry. Yeah. Because then there are people where they're like, I feel almost like you're not letting me feel the way that I feel, because I have to feel happy for you to be happy. And so there's this kind of falseness that can rise up. And so I mean, I get it. There's that saying about you're only as happy as your least happy child, but it's like if you're as unhappy as that unhappy child, that is not going to help that child.
Yeah.
And so again, like maybe are you as happy as you can be under the circumstances? Maybe you are like so worried that you kind of can't feel happy, but are you doing the things to be as happy as you can be?
Yeah. And, I received a few questions related to that with this idea of, almost fake it till you make it with the happiness, that if you act happy, the emotion will follow. And people writing in and saying, I get that and I want to do that, but I also know it's important not to ignore the negative feelings and, to allow myself the room to process the negative emotions. So,
Yeah, well, negative emotions are super important, and sometimes people sort of expect that, but with sort of writing about the happiness project, that like I think everyone's aim should be to be a 10 on the 1 to 10 scale 24/7. That's not realistic, and it wouldn't even be a good life. Like absolutely negative emotions. Somebody was like, you shouldn't even call them negative emotions. So okay, let's just those emotions like anger, guilt, regret, remorse, resentment, righteous indignation, all those things. They have a really important role to play because those are the big flashing signs that like something needs to change or like something's going off the rails. And so they're very, very valuable. Now, with kind of the act the way you want to feel, I think a lot of times we feel a lot of things. And many things are true. And it's sort of like, can you lean into the emotions that you wish you felt? So you walk into a party and you're like, part of me feels kind of insecure and part of me feels shy and part of me feels like I don't feel like dealing with talking to a bunch of people I don't know, but part of me is excited to be here and part of me is hopeful that I can make a new friend, and part of me sort of interested to check out the food. And like it's like, okay, can you act, it's just like, okay, well, act friendly, and like that will help you feel friendly, because it's bonkers the degree to which you can control your inner emotional life by the way that you behave. And so when you say like, I need to process those feelings, well, it's also by expressing those feelings, you are creating and amplifying those feelings. And so it's, we don't always feel the way we think you don't always, feelings are complicated. And so to the degree so that you can steer them, it's a tool that can be very useful.
So how would someone know, if they're feeling upset or disappointed about something, when it's beneficial to process them, to use someone's term, and when it's beneficial to try to see the bright side or act happier?
Well, you act the way you wish you felt. So if you wish you felt different, try acting that way. If you feel like I need to process this, then you want to process it. If you start ruminating, if you're starting to get in that cycle where like you're just thinking about it over and over, you're not, and there's no conclusion, there's no forward motion, there's no insight. It's just like the circling. Then you want to start thinking about, well, how are you going to deal with sort of just like this constant rumination? Again, it's so hard to speak in, one of the reasons that I wrote the Happiness Project from the first person was I was like, I can speak with utmost authority about my own challenges and my own issues. But when you start saying like, well, what's true for everyone? Well, it starts getting really complicated because there's a lot of reasons people could be feeling a lot of different ways. So, sometimes you just sort of have to think really just, I do think that sometimes, and I would be curious to know what you think, like, I think sometimes people are sort of like, just give me the PDF. And it's like, yeah, there's no PDF. Like, you're the PDF. You got to look within yourself. And that's hard. Self-knowledge is hard. Self-awareness is really hard. But like, yeah, it's like, you're the PDF.
Yeah. And I so agree with that. And I am definitely not the happiness expert that you are, but I think from my perspective, and I'm curious to hear what you think, I like to tell, whether it be friends or family or my therapy clients, that emotions are information.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I love that phrase.
And see what it's signaling to you, then that's valuable to feel the emotion. Yeah. But once you've gotten that information, then you have to make a plan to move forward. And so a lot the research that that my colleagues and I do is related to repetitive negative thinking, which is very idea of rumination, and repetitive
Yep.
negative thinking is something you see in depression and
Yep.
anxiety and even, subclinical emotions. And when people
Yep.
find that a repetitive cycle, that's, I think, when it starts to become destructive, and when instead it's really time, ideally before they get into that pattern.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I think, because you were talking about like having things to do. I think that's one of the reasons that like sometimes my approach is appealing to people, because sometimes people are like, well, just I want to just do something. And like if you feel like, oh, I'm doing even this one little thing and it's kind of giving me a little bit of a jolt of something, or it's showing me kind of a creative way of going about it that I hadn't thought of. Like I just think of the example of New Year's resolutions. A lot of people are really discouraged because they've tried and failed to make New Year's resolutions, year after year. And they feel bad, and they're like, well, other people can do this. What's wrong with me? Other people are grown up. What's wrong with me? This person in my life can do this effortlessly. My sweetheart, my boss, my sister-in-law, whatever. What's wrong with me? And it's kind of a relief to be like, hey, first of all, if you're having that challenge, probably a lot of other people are having that challenge. Here's a lot of ways you could try to achieve the same aim. Or you could say, like, maybe you don't like New Year's resolutions. A lot of people don't like New Year's resolution. Have a one-word theme for the year and think of all the ways you could live up to that theme. Or do like what we do on the podcast, which is like 23 for 23, where you make a list of 23 things you want to do in 2023 and you tackle it that way. Like, there's other ways that maybe could make it more fun or more engaging for you, or feel fresher. Because it's all like, you might want to get to the top of the mountain, but people can take a lot of different roads there. And there's might be a road that a lot of people like, and it's not a road that works for you. And so you try something else, and then instead of just thinking, what's wrong with me? I can't do it. I failed. I'm going to fail again. Here I go. What's wrong with me? I fail. And
And
then
I
that's just a circle.
too, for a lot of people, and I was going to ask you this earlier, but I'll bring it up now because you brought up resolutions, that people make goals that are almost too lofty or too broad.
Oh,
And
so true.
the feeling of achievement for a large undertaking, but I think some people don't gauge like how large it should be, and that I find, both with my clients and personally, that sometimes if you have a large goal, breaking it up into smaller pieces, and instead of having one large resolution for the whole year, have a goal for the month, or a goal for the week, or a goal for the day, and breaking it up into smaller tasks that will
Yeah.
still allow you to feel like you had that large undertaking, but doesn't make it feel insurmountable.
Yeah, and I think one way to think about it that's sometimes clarifying is like, don't think about what the habit, the resolution should be the action, not the goal. So like a resolution like learn Italian,
Right.
get back in shape. One is huge, and like, can you do that in a year? And one is so vague. What does that mean to get back in shape? Like, how do you know? So it's what I think is helpful is you want something specific and actionable that you articulate. Like, what are you going to do? I'm going to learn 5 new Italian words a day. I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk a day. Like a habit strategy that a lot of people like is don't break the chain. Like, I have the Happier app, which is all a bunch of habit tracking tools. I have journals. And in both of those, we have Don't Break the Chain, because that is a tool that a lot of people really like. And maybe you're like, my Don't Break the Chain is only for 4 days a week. I'm not aiming for 7 days a week, but I can keep that chain going. But it's like, you want something that you can monitor. So it should be something where you can go, when you go to bed at night, you're like, did you do that? Did you learn 5 Italian words today, Sarah? Yes, I did. Because it's like, did you learn Italian today, Sarah? No. Is there ever a day when you're going to say, yeah, I learned Italian, And so, or like working on a novel, something like write a best-selling novel. I have friends who have made that resolution. Well, first of all, you can't control if it's best-selling. And finish a novel, it's like, well, maybe you're not finished by then. So but it's like, work on my novel for at least 5 hours a week, or work on my novel for 30 minutes a day, or whatever it is, or work on my novel every Saturday afternoon, or whatever. And then you're like, whether you did it or not. So it's like in the form of something that can be monitored, and where you're like, did I or did I not actually do that thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I all the time at work hear people say, like, I want to make people like me. My goal is for more people to like me. And it's important to realize
Dang.
that, that's not something in our control, right? So
No.
let's orient that. Let's reframe that to say, what can you do that to contribute to that? Because at the end of the day, you can't control
Right.
who likes you, control how other people feel or act. So what goals can you set that are in your control?
Um, yeah, and then you could like make a list, and that actually might be really satisfying. Like here, I'll give people an idea. If you are in an office or school, like where there's a bunch of people, and people are really into a particular TV show, even if you don't feel like watching it particularly, watch it. Because that is a great way, if it's a very low stakes conversation, you can just kind of like ask about, oh, what did you think of that? And were you surprised by that? And what did you think of that cost or whatever? It's very easy to cross hierarchy, like even if you're low down or you're high up and you're trying to talk up and down, that can be, a lot of times people feel awkward. If you don't know how to make conversation with people, you feel like you don't know what to say, gives you something to reach for. And so that's like a thing. You're like, I'm not really into House of the Dragon, but everybody else is talking about it. So like, why don't I do it? Because it's pretty easy and it's going to give me like that like that toehold into a conversation. So yeah, when you start thinking about like, once a day, am I making conversation? Am I saying hello to people? Like, am I keeping my earbuds off at least part of the day so I don't, whatever it is. There's lots of things a person could do. But then there's other things like, did I or did I not do it in this day? Not, have I made people like me better? It's like, okay, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm mindful of time and I want to give you time to talk about, a lot of people have asked to hear about your new book, but if I could just
Okay.
the questions that I think people
Sure.
would resonate with. So I often hear people, again, whether it be therapy clients or friends, tell me that they'd be happy if only for X. So for example, if only they were in a relationship, or if only they really liked their job, and seem really convinced that this one aspect of their life would totally change their level of happiness. What is your response to that? And is there any risk in investing so much in one aspect of someone's life in order to obtain happiness?
Well, there's something called the arrival fallacy, which is the idea that like I'll be happy once I get married, I'll be happy once I make partner, I'll be happy once I move. And what the research shows, as I'm sure you know, is that typically people don't get that big gain of happiness the way they sort of expect. Partly because by the time you get there, you've sort of worked it into your sense of your life and your happiness. And partly because often those things, in the abstract, like they're very clean and easy, but then when you get there, they have their own complications and responsibilities and things to deal with. Um, on the other hand, sometimes people, and we've all been there, we're like, there's something big and wrong. And back to your point about like if you're just ruminating about it
Yeah.
and thinking like that there's this fantasy life where you would be happy, this fantasy self who's like has this this multiverse life, that's not fruitful. But if you're like, I really hate my job, I think I would be happier if I had a different job. It's like, okay, so given that you think that, what would you do to change it? But one thing I would say that can often be really helpful if you're in there is really identify the problem. Because I don't know if you found this, but I've, in myself and in other people, I think sometimes people are like, I have a terrible job, I'm super stressed out at work. But those kinds of vague terms, it's like, okay, but is that because you have a really bad boss who's very undermining and keeps taking credit for your work? Has there been a big layoff? So now you're doing the work of two people instead of one. Do you not have the tools that you need to do your work effectively? Are you undertrained? Like, do you need to like get yourself like up to speed on some certain kinds of software that will let you like have more interesting work, but you need to do that work yourself? Do you have a terrible commute? Did your best friend at work go and now you feel like no one's got your back? Like all of do you stay up late all night watching House of the Dragon and so you're like exhausted at work? All of these things could be true. And all of these things could be giving you the feeling like, oh my gosh, I really don't like my job. But how you would address it would be very, very different. Because it's like, if you really don't like your boss, okay, well, how likely is that to change? In some places, it might change pretty quick. maybe you wait out the boss, or maybe you're like, well, actually, it's because I'm really exhausted. Okay, well, why don't you try getting more sleep and seeing if things seem to get easier. And so if you identify the problem, I think that can often be helpful about what steps you might take to address it, and how how massive a change. Sometimes a big change is necessary, and sometimes a little change can make a big difference in someone's happiness for the situation.
Yeah. And this one is a little specific, but I think can be probably generalized to other people. So it says, my mother-in-law loves to play the victim and won't take responsibility for her own happiness. Do you think there's anything someone can do to help people claim their own happiness?
Well, this sounds like help rejecting complainers, which is like a phrase I love. And these are the people where you're like, well, what about this? And they're like, no. What about this? No. I mean, the thing is, I would say no. I mean, happy people help make people happy, but you can't make someone be happy. And I do, because of emotional contagion, and also because of this feeling like I can't be happy if others aren't happy. Sometimes people are like, well, you've got to be happy if only you're like, the Death Star sucking the life out of me. I want you to be happy for my own protection. And so you can kind of polarize people. There's also kind of like, some people are naturally Tiggers and some people are naturally Eeyores. And then so she might say like, I'm perfectly content with my outlook on the life. I think I have a realistic way of looking at the world. I think you're kind of a Pollyanna, and like, I'm trying to help you have a better. So it's like you're polarizing and exhausting each other. She may be just as she may be saying something similar about you. So I think in that case, like, you don't want this kind of vampiric drain of your own happiness and energy, trying to come up with solutions to deal with someone else who either doesn't want to change, or doesn't see the need to change, or is resisting the idea that change is possible. I think you just have to say, like, not for me to fix.
Yeah. And then I'll make this the last one before I open the floor to you to share the wonderful things that you're working on. I think this one can be a quick one. So someone asked, what are your thoughts on doing a joint happiness project? For example, could my fiance and I do a happiness project together, or do you think it's more meaningful for each of us to do our own?
I think it would be wonderful. I have to say, it never even occurred to me. That is not the guy I married. Like, he would not be interested in that. It never occurred to me. If it's something that both people are excited about, I think it would be amazing. I've talked to people who've done it. I think it's fantastic if both people are equally interested in doing it. I think the problem is if one person is like, this would be a really great thing for us to do together, and the other person's like, not into it. Because then one person's going to be very disappointed and frustrated, and probably the other person will be like frustrated and annoyed. And that's not a great way to have a happiness project. So I think you don't wait for somebody else to participate. You don't wait for somebody to be enthusiastic and want to join in. But if like I said, like, that is not, that my husband would not be interested in doing that. But if he were, I would love it. So I think it'd be really fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, Gretchen has written so many books on the topic. I chose this one because it was kind of the book that sparked this whole and so it's such a special one, but all of them have so much to contribute. And I know you mentioned that you have a new book coming out. I would love for you to share with people what that is and what other projects you have going on that people can check out on your website or anywhere else.
Yeah, so my book is coming out in April, and it's called, and it's all about, I don't think I've like revealed the official title, but spoiler alert, it's all about the five senses and tapping into our five senses to like make ourselves feel, happier and calmer and more creative and sort of more connected to our memories. It was just like absolutely the most extraordinarily fun project to work on. Because I don't know about other people, but I was just feeling like I was in my head all the time. I was like behind screens, like things felt kind of hyper saturated and over processed, but then they also felt kind of like thin and kind of muffled. And so I really wanted to like just get into the richness of just the sensory world. It is so unbelievably powerful. So that every book I write, I think, this is the most interesting book I will ever write. It's all downhill from here. I'll never find such a good subject. And then I find one and I'm so happy. So I'm so excited about this book. And yeah, so that's coming out in April. If you're interested in like some of the tools that I was talking about and kind of like finding out your tendency and how you could translate that into tools that you could use, you can check out the Happier app. If you just go to thehappierApp.com, you can find information. And you can pick an aim for free and like try an aim if you want to try it out. So if you wanted to like, read for 20 minutes a day, you could do a Don't Break the Chain or whatever it is, or you could use a photo log or a 1-sentence journal, or there's a lot of different things there you can try. So that's something I've got going. We mentioned I have the podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin. That is super fun. My sister and I, have so much fun talking about this. And it is, if you like practical stuff, it's very practical. Like we have a segment, try this at home, which is like something that people can try at home in their ordinary lives. We have happiness hacks, which are like these little solutions that get you like so excited, even though turns out people are very fired up about packing cubes. Elizabeth and I are both underbuyers. It never occurred to us to like tip a toe into the world of packing cubes. Turns out people are really into packing cubes. Know yourself better questions. We sometimes have interviews and things like that. If you go to my website, GretchenRubin.com, like there's quizzes there, there's articles there. You can read about the books. I have discussion guides and like a lot of PDFs. Like if you want to learn more about your tendency, stuff about like how to use it in a relationship or at work or whatever. I got so much stuff. I got the calendar of catalysts. I got a lot of stuff there. So check it out. Poke around.
And I will add to that each one of your books contribute something really unique. So if someone, the Happiness Project and
here, I'll do a slideshow. So Better Than Before is all about how to make and break habits. It's the 21 strategies we can use to make or break our habits. Oh, Happier at Home. We didn't talk about Happier at Home. This is my sister's favorite book that I wrote. And it's all about happiness, but it's focused at home. Because it's hard to be happy if you're not happy at home. So this is like relationships, time, possessions. Here's the 4 tendencies. We're talking about this. So if you're interested in the 4 tendencies, this is all about the 4 tendencies. Because the minute Better Than Before came out, all anybody wanted to do was talk about the 4 tendencies. Happiness Project. It's a classic that I wrote. Thank you. I'm so happy. Oh, Outer Order, Inner Calm. This is so fun. This is a little book. This is a book. It's just like little hacks and tips if you want to create more outer order to get inner calm. So I got a lot of, depending on what angle you're interested in. They're also fun to write.
And they're so fun to read too. I think the best types of books are ones that you walk away learning something that you can apply to your life, but you also enjoy reading. And someone just chimed in and said that she loved your podcast episode in which you were organizing your sister's closet.
Oh my gosh, that was episode 10. That was so much fun. I want to do it again. Yes, we'll do it again. Tell her thank you.
Someone else just said that she loves your podcast and she used a packing cube on a recent trip to Egypt and loved them. So
there you go. Who knew about packing cubes?
And so thank you again for this. This was such a pleasure. I have so many more questions that I would love to ask, but I'm mindful of time, and people just were so interested in everything and so excited to have you on. So
one more thing I should mention. I can't believe I forgot. I have it's called, I have 2 newsletters that people might be interested in. One is called 5 Things Making Me Happy, and that is it's a short weekly free newsletter where I talk about 5 things making me happy, and that's just, I think, super fun. Like I just have links to a bunch of cool stuff. And then if you love quotations, because I love quotations, and I know a lot of other people like quotations too. I have something called the Moment of Happiness, where every weekday I send it's just nothing more than a beautiful quotation that's sort of thought-provoking. So if you want to sign up for that, you can go to GretchenRubin.com/newsletters, and then you can pick whichever ones you want. They're all free. But those are fun ways. If you're interested in this stuff, it's kind of like, it's, a way to keep in touch on that.
Signing up for those. So.
Oh, good. Yes.
So thank you so much. And for anyone who somehow stumbled on this live discussion and doesn't know, I run a well-being book club. So if anyone's interested, you can either follow the Instagram for updates, or there's in the Instagram bio an email update listserv for updates on future live discussions in the books. But thank you so much. This was such a pleasure, and
Oh, I so enjoyed the conversation.
thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did too.
Oh, well, I so appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.